This is just a listing of titles where you might run into these particular IO psychologists who are focusing more on addressing the issues of the workplace and the company that is paying them. Don't worry about writing down this slide. You know as well as I do that a movement from the last 10 years has been changes in job titles. Might not mean anything practical. What's a cashier at Walmart called now? Not a cashier, but anyone know? Sales associate. Sounds a little more impressive, looks better on a business card, doesn't mean that the job necessarily changed. It's not to derogate a cashier at Walmart or a manager or a CEO. But titles don't necessarily mean something different. Staff member, manager, director, VP of, take a pick of your field. Assistant, associate, full professor. It's not just in psychology, management, organizational behavior, industrial relations. I know people, same degree, same training. One of them ended up in a psychology department. They earned maybe, even at a PhD level, a 60, 70 star. Someone went over to a business school, easily making $30,000 to $40,000 more just because it was a business school. Same training, same degree, essentially is teaching almost the same courses. Sometimes it just depends on where you end up as the world of work works. Management consultant, behavioral scientist, it's all over the place. One thing you might want to remember is it's not just usually you're only in one of them. Sometimes an IO psychologist can wear the same hat. Most of them do end up in academics. But a good chunk of them are also in private organizations or consulting, and usually the academics might also do consulting. So sometimes when you're dealing with a professor, you guys have it a lot at Morrisville. Now, I did not study IO psychology directly. I got a lot of training in social psychology, a field that is very closely tied to IO. So I'm not a consultant because I didn't quite get courses training to an IO psychology degree. But I still know about the principles, those courses of study. I took IO courses in addition to rounding out my upper level expertise training at the master's and PhD level. So I'm more suited to the realm of academics to teach a course like this. Don't worry, you're still getting expertise. But you know that you at least have some courses there where people may not have higher level degrees. They might have an associate. They might not even have a degree. That doesn't mean that they're not extremely qualified to teach a course. They've got the requirements necessary to convey the knowledge to you. Sometimes you get people coming in from the real world or the business world. How many of you have had those? They've been great teachers. How many of you have had them and they've been like, oh my God, what are they doing in front of a class? Goes both ways. Okay? But point for IO is you can see them usually in a combination of academics and maybe consulting. Usually if they're in private practice, they stay in private practice. Private practice and consulting can overlap as well. Just in case this field interests you, you do make some pretty decent coin. A master's degree in this, it's not been unheard of that the ranges are misleading type of statistics in a lot of respects. But you can find a range of about 40 to 70, 75,000 for a master's level, which is pretty darn good for training in a psychology master's. IO psychology is probably the money field when it comes to specific training at the master's level. Just in case you are interested in this particular topic. But for all practical purposes, when you're sitting in this class, if you have to tell your family something to make it look like your tuition money for this particular course is teaching you something, here's a couple of shorthand things you can say. And this is the rule of thumb that you can use to help kind of keep the first half of the semester, what binds all this together? And the second half of the semester, what binds all this together? Okay? The I side really does stand for an I. It's right there for the first bullet point. This is more for your understanding of when I'm going to talk about chapters 3, 4, 5, a little bit of 6 and 7. They're all bound by that first bullet point. Our basic understanding of industrial psychology, the I side, is that this looks at individual differences and how they relate to job performance. That's why it's called industrial. I'm not going to make this a history course. If you wanted to read about history, you can do that online. You can read about the past. Or I might mention names as they're appropriate to get an idea. But back Industrial Revolution, especially World War I and World War II. Literally, what those three events had in common, what you have now is a plethora of jobs, mainly low-level ones, literally cogs in the machine, right? Factory work, Army privates. You have a lot of positions you need to fill, and darn quick. But what they often assume is that you've got to find the right gear, the right cog to fit into that particular position. And it's all based on this assumption that somewhere along the line you all might have similar qualities. Like how many of you describe yourself as reasonably intelligent? Keep your hands up. I'm just getting a chair to wait for y'all to raise your hands. Seriously, raise your hands. I don't like being ticked off after lunch. Thank you. You're not in college at this point because you're check cleared. You have a reasonable level of intelligence, people. Pat yourself on the back. Some of your professors don't ever pay you a compliment. You're your own best advocate. Remember that. None of my classes ever get that right the first time I ask. But you all have different levels of intelligence. That's why maybe some of you are a little gun-shy to raise your hand. There are individual differences, different ways of assessing. We will talk about these individual differences and how they relate to the big one, performance. What do you assess as far as what the worker did? Individual differences connecting to performance. That's eye psychology, guys. That's your first 7 to 8 weeks exploring that simple relationship. Okay? That's the oldest type of study here. Some subspecialties, selection and placement, criterion development. You know the term dependent variable? You will. Criterion is synonymous with dependent variable. You're going to find the simple definition is it's what you measure. It's the end result. It's what you're looking for. It's why in that regression equation, if you remember the lines from math class, however you want to think about it, it's whatever your end result is, it's what you're truly interested in. Criterion is performance. But how do you assess performance? Well, we'll talk about that. Now, training and development, job analysis. How do you figure out what a particular job should be looking for, both in individual differences as well as performance? You're going to do a job analysis. Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds. And performance management, we'll talk a little bit about that. Moving on. Industrial psychology, besides job analysis, a very useful type of tool that has come out of this practice, criterion development, selection, performance appraisal, training development, succession planning. If any of those things interest you, industrial psychology, the study of this stuff, if you really want to focus on, and these are the people that also focus on development of tests, that is literally $1 billion industry. There is no single test. There are people that develop selection tools for a living, and you go out there and sell it just like any good in any field. But you have to have the chops to properly design your test, say it's better than, it can do this that these other tests can't, and use the language in, guess what, Chapter 2, to show that your product is good quality. That's why we spend so much time on it. That's the language of IO Site, Chapter 2.